Good morning, everyone. As people keep filing in, on behalf of the Economic Developers Council of Ontario, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's Trade and Tariff virtual roundtable discussion. We're pleased to have you participate today. The session will be recorded, and the recording and a white paper reviewing today's talks will be available on our website. We have also scheduled our next roundtable discussion to take place on Thursday, August 14th at 10 a.m. So if you're interested in participating, watch for that event to come up. Thank you all to your commitment to strengthening Ontario's economic development through these uncertain, ever-changing, and unique times. We're excited about today's discussion, and I look forward to making it engaging and productive experience for everyone. As a quick overview of where we're at, over the past month, we've had tensions flare over Canada's proposal at a retroactive digital tax that got President Trump quite upset, and he suspended the trade talks, which then had us rescind the tax, which has opened the trade talks or reopened the trade talks. So we'll see how that goes. Every day it seems to change. And for us in Ontario, this means the trade turbulence continues to create challenges. We've got investment delays, projected job losses, manufacturing distribution, and mounting pressures to diversify, but it's also created some very unique opportunities and new relationships to build. Today, we are happy to have Brock Dickinson back to lead this session. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to Brock for his participation and continued support in leading our sessions over the past and today. I also want to thank all of you for your commitment to economic development in Ontario. Your engagement and your contributions are vital in shaping the way forward in this complex and ever-changing landscape. So thank you again for all being here. I look forward to our discussion. And now over to you, Brock.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Stephanie. I'm going to try to share my screen here. This is always the moment at which you have a mild panic to make sure that
Is it going to work?
everything
Will it
is
go the way
coming
you
up
want it
okay.
to? Did you share the right screen?
All right. Is that
Yep, it's
is that
there, but it's not
showing?
in presentation mode yet.
Yeah, I'm just trying to. Perfect. How's that?
There you go. You're perfect.
Excellent. So I wanted to start by saying I really appreciate the fact that we've got such a great turnout in the middle of the summer. This is not an easy time to be trying to gather to do these things. And I guess part of what's happening is that we're all still kind of anxious about what's going on in the context of trade and tariffs, and um, they're not taking a break south of the border, so I guess we can't take too much of a break north of the border either. But I do sort of feel like there's this kind of moment where we're sort of thinking. I'm thinking of this as the summer of Trump. There's a certain sense that yeah, it's summer, but there's a different sort of coloring of things that's going on. I sort of feel like we want to get away from some of these discussions, but we keep getting pulled back to them, and so I sort of understand that. And I kind of expect that might be true for Trump as well. I think with the AI video around the vision of Gaza that he released earlier this year, he kind of gave us some insights into what he really felt was an exciting way to spend his downtime, which is apparently lounging on a beach. He did sort of have some really interesting images of dancing girls, dancing men. I'm not sure in that AI video that he released around Gaza. But it does sort of give us this sense that there's a whole lot of things going on, and as always, part of what we're trying to do is to get a read on this. And one thing I want to say is that a lot of times we talk about how Trump has kind of upended stability in the international context. That everything seems a little unstable, everything seems a little chaotic. And I'm sort of quick to point out that, in fact, we're seeing a lot of stability, right? Like a lot of things haven't changed, despite all the talk about, what's going to happen and what's going to be done. The U.S. hasn't bought Greenland. They haven't invaded Panama. We're not the 51st state, right? And so part of, I think, that the message for the summer of Trump is just kind of step back a little bit and say, hang on, a lot of this is bluster. A lot of this is tough talk. But what's really changing? Well, we do have to be kind of aware of certain things, but we don't want to kind of overread or overreact to some of what's going on. I think one of the obvious things that's not changing in this sort of period of stability is that we're really not seeing a whole lot of movement on the trade front, right? So President Trump had suggested that there would be 200 trade deals done by now. In actuality, there are three that have been done. That's Britain, China, and Vietnam. The British deal, for example, said that the British promised that they would buy half of the planes that they'd already ordered. So it's really hard to know what these trade deal structures actually mean, but really not much is changing. And sort of as part of that, we kind of see this continued push of deadlines, right? Liberation Day got pushed back 3 months to this week. Now it's been pushed back again to August 1st. We've sort of got this sense that because there's not much movement, the dates and the timelines keep sliding. So when you got together for this roundtable last month, and I unfortunately wasn't able to join last month's session, but this is where things sort of stood at that time, that we'd had this kind of rolling series of tariffs. In early June, the steel and aluminum tariffs had just been announced, and I'm sure that was part of the focus of the discussion last time around. Since June 4th, I would say, again, in the sense of kind of mild stability, there's been a couple of things that have changed, but by and large, things are progressing as normal. So one of the sort of key signals that we've got that not a lot is changing is that the purpose of a lot of Trump's tariffs and trade actions have been this notion that he's trying to kind of force investment into the United States, that manufacturing in particular, but investment in general, is going to go to the U.S. And I think one of the things that we've seen over the last few weeks is we've got more and more evidence that people are reacting to this, but not in a very real way, right? So lots of people, lots of companies, lots of countries are sort of talking about the investments they're going to make in the United States to appease Trump in the tariff context. That's the green line that we see on this chart. This is all the announced activity. The red line shows the actual activity. And one of the things that we can see there is that it's actually tailing off a little bit since Trump came into office. So lots of talk about all the great investments that are going to be made under, the Trump regime. But not much activity really happening. And I think this is a kind of a pattern that we'll see a few times over the next couple of minutes. And we can trace that investment activity by quarter, and we can see that this is really dropping off since President Trump came into office. So lots of bluster. Lots of deadlines. The deadlines continue to evolve, and they don't seem to be having a whole lot of impact on the market. So in the Canadian context, I would say there's really only been two big things that happened in the course of the last month. One was the response the U.S. had to the digital services tax, where on a Friday afternoon, President Trump came out and suspended the discussions. And by Monday morning, it was all back to normal. We were back into the discussions. And we could certainly have a debate around whether or not it was the right thing for the Carney government to sort of give up that quickly on the digital services tax. But I guess I kind of see it as just refusing to have that negotiation in the media, right? Like, okay, Friday afternoon, you're trying to kind of ruin everybody's weekend with this big discussion, President Trump, around the digital services tax. By Monday morning, we'll just say, whatever. We'll kind of continue on with our private discussions. We don't need to fight about this openly. The other big thing that's happened over the course of the last month since the last roundtable is the announcement just in the last couple of days of a 50% tariff on copper and a possibility of a 200% tariff on pharmaceuticals. And that is something that maybe sort of is a little more impactful in the context of some of our communities. And so I think, maybe worth a little bit of consideration around what the implications of that are. So on the copper side, certainly copper is pretty important in the context of the Canadian economy. As the slide shows here, we're the number 11 producer of copper in the world. When we think about what that might mean for specific communities, I think this map is pretty helpful. What we're really looking at is those communities that have red or green symbols in them. And if we zoom in on Ontario, we can see that what we're really talking about is mining operations in the Sudbury area and in the Timmins area, and some processing in both Sudbury and Niagara. And so a small number of communities implicated in the copper discussion, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be unimportant for those particular communities. Now the copper tariffs stuff has played out in some really interesting ways, even though it's just a couple of days old. One thing that it's done is to drive copper prices up very, very rapidly. And so we can see just over the course of a trading day here, how copper jumped in the neighborhood of, 10% in terms of its cost. So this is sort of, potentially a mixed story for Canadian communities. If we think of Timmins and the Sudbury in the mining sector, now they're getting more money for their product because the prices have sort of risen. And so this, processing and exporting of copper products may be a little more challenged, but there's a kind of a nuanced story here. And one of the things that the copper experts are really telling us is that this may ultimately lead to a sort of a dual price for copper in the international markets, that there will be a copper price for the world as a whole, and there will be a different copper price for the United States. And in fact, this goes back to that sense that lots of announcements about FDI, but not much activity happening in the US. If copper's more expensive in the US than in the rest of the world, there's no way that copper manufacturing or copper related production is going to shift into the US. And so we kind of see this sort of nuanced story that plays out in that copper space as well. The same story I think can be told in the pharmaceutical space. So what we've seen over the last few months since Trump came into office is lots and lots of announcements from pharmaceutical companies about investments they're going to make in the US. So Roche, for example, shown here on this chart in yellow, promised to invest $50 billion in pharmaceutical operations in the United States. But when we sort of look at the numbers at a deeper level, what this chart shows is that all of the announcements that have happened over the last few years really relate to, or a few months, really relate to stuff that's already been in the works, stuff that's already been planned. So the blue portions of these charts show what was already planned before Trump came into office, and the red shows the incremental increase that's been added to that since Trump came into office. So really, this notion that he's driving the trade discussion or that this is somehow going to put the US in a very powerful position doesn't seem to be playing out in the numbers in any substantial way. So that's kind of interesting. But what does this mean for Canada and for the communities here in Ontario that we're all working with? I think there's a few things that we can see. One is that, of course, both imports and exports between Canada and the US are down, and they're down pretty substantially. We can see that our exports are down more than our imports. But in both instances, we kind of see this pattern where early in the year, sort of late last year, early this year, exports and imports ramped up as everybody stockpiled all the things that they were going to need in advance of the trade war. And then numbers have declined since then. So we are seeing declining trade. But what's really hard to kind of separate out here is how much is related to that stockpiling that went on and how much is related to the tariff activity itself. We can also see in relation to that we're obviously finding different markets for our goods. So our exports to other countries, to other than the US, are way, way up. In fact, we hit record levels in April. They're higher than they have ever been historically. And our imports from other countries are also substantially up, which kind of reflects that declining imports from the US as well. So in the absence of a good trade relationship with the US, we're building lots of interesting relationships with other countries in other places. The one place I think that does signal the kind of the biggest challenges for us, and this is going to be of major concern to lots of the communities that are here in the discussion today, is really around motor vehicles and motor vehicle parts and components. This is an area where we're obviously seeing some fairly substantial declines, both of imports and exports. And if you're in an automotive community, you know that that's a sector that's facing a lot of uncertainty and some struggles. I don't think the story is all bad, but we're definitely kind of seeing the uncertainty in that space kind of lead in some interesting directions. And all of this kind of feeds into this bigger question that I think we're struggling with this summer is, are we headed for a recession? So if we see that imports and exports are down, if we see the auto sector is declining, what's really going on? Well, we've just recently got the data on April from StatsCan. So we're going back a couple of months, but that's the first month of the last quarter. And it does show that Canada's economy contracted, that there was a decline in GDP. So if that continues for long enough, that would be what creates a recession. But I think there's a sort of a more nuanced story here. The decline in April was 0.1%, so really small. What was driving it was really that automotive manufacturing sector. So a decline in GDP within the auto sector of 5.2%. that basically means that there is something negative going on with the auto sector itself. And so we definitely have to be aware of that. But most of the decline in the economy as a whole seems to be driven out of that transportation manufacturing and auto manufacturing space. If we look at the finance and insurance sector, it actually grew during that period. If we look at government spending, which is important when we're sort of facing a potential recession, that spending grew in that period. And when we look at things like tourism-related spending, where been expecting a bit of a boom because we're not traveling to the States and spending our money there. We're trying to kind of keep that closer to home. We've seen a big boom in entertainment and recreation and related expenses in the economy. And so part of what I think is happening is that we've got some pretty positive signals in terms of what's going on in the economy, but we've got this kind of heavy weight that we're trying to lift in the automotive context. And so really those separate forces are kind of offsetting each other at the moment, with this sense that at least in April we were kind of standing still. A decline of 0.1% is pretty much sort of a zero figure. But it does suggest that we might be looking at a little bit of recessionary pressure over the next couple of months. So Deloitte, for example, is forecasting that between April and September, we are likely to see some continued pressure, some shrinking of the Canadian economy, but that by October, we'll be back in growth mode, and that October, November, December, that final quarter of the year may actually be pretty strong. So this suggests that, yes, technically we're going to have a recession over the next 6 months, but it's going to be pretty minor. That, of course, doesn't play out the same way everywhere across the country. And the interesting thing to sort of think about is as we look at some of the forecast data, Ontario seems to be the province that's going to be hardest hit by this. Again, we're not going to see negative growth this year. The economy will continue to expand and move in positive directions, but the economic growth in Ontario may be the smallest of any province in the country. And again, that's in large part because of the concentration of the automotive sector in Ontario. So I guess as I sort of struggle to kind of figure out where we are at the moment and what the takeaways from this might be, is that yeah, we're continuing to see lots of political discussion about trade and tariffs, lots of threats and bluster and negotiation through the media, particularly from those south of the border. But the actual economic picture is not that bad. The integration of the auto sector across the border definitely creates problems for auto-reliant communities. But the broader picture looks like it's, not too bad and perhaps heading in some interesting directions. Growing numbers of export partners, growing segments of the economy, and growing opportunities in some of those areas we've talked about at past sessions, like, domestic tourism and that sort of thing. So some good news stories there that are kind of hidden in the larger headlines. So what's my sense going forward? I'm not convinced that we will have 6 months or two consecutive quarters of economic decline. So I think it's possible that we may avoid a recession. Having said that, if you're in an automotive community, yeah, there's definitely still going to be some challenges as we sort of move forward. So hopefully that's some insights into where I think things have gone over the last month or so since the last of these sessions. And I'd be happy to take some questions about that, but I'm really interested in kind of hearing what you're seeing in your community and whether you are seeing some of these silver linings in sectors other than the auto space, or if you have a big auto component to your local economy, how that's playing out, and whether you've got some solutions, suggestions, ideas that may have been tried that are doing some positive things in the context of your community as well. Anybody want to kick us off? As Stephanie will tell you, I'm infamous for volunteering people to jump into these discussions as well. So speak now, or I may make you speak, sort of thing. Anybody want to pose a question or share some insights? Sue.
Hi, everyone. Brock, you always have the best slides. They always. I will sign in no matter what you're speaking of, just for the comedy of being able to take a situation that is dire at first, like you said, from the media, and then putting us all at ease with a little humor. It's appreciated. I am now with the municipality of Leamington, so I've was with Kingsville before, so I'm even more into the agriculture section. Um, and I find it really interesting because I'm in Essex County, the top of Essex County, Windsor, which is completely automotive. And then in Leamington, we are all about agro. agriculture and food security. And it's really interesting the different, it's almost like night and day in a little bit of ways, and watching how the bluster that you said affects when we think that there's going to be more tariffs on produce imports, right? How that changes some of the views and just the political positioning of everything within our own community, I find is super interesting. And I think that's a challenge as ECDev professionals is always having that nuanced approach. Of balancing with when you have people who are doing kind of, fine in it, and then people who aren't doing fine in it. And especially from a municipality, looking at programs that benefit both. So I don't know if that's, I was an ECDev before a lot of this happened. And that's what I find is a new challenge, is that language and how I position programming and myself in the situation. So if anyone has, things that have worked on that, I would love to hear those as well.
Let me ask an additional question there, Sue, as we start to get into this. So are you hearing more positive stories from the ag sector in Leamington? Is that part of what's going on? Is that they're seeing opportunities or less impacts than they might have expected?
I think that we have, they have a lot of lobbying power. Our MPP is the Minister of Agriculture, which just was named in the recent Ontario election, which is, interesting and strategic, I think. So I think that there's a bit of calm has come over on the surface. Now, whether, what's happening below behind closed doors, you don't really know always, but I think there is a feeling of they've dodged the bullet for now,
Right.
but they're never sure.
And my recollection, Sue, is that Leamington has a lot of greenhouse-based agriculture. So that may be a space in which you can kind of shift production more quickly than in traditional crop and field-based agriculture. Is that maybe part of it that you're hearing good things from
It
the greenhouse folks?
it can be, but what's interesting with the greenhouses, so we ship with the largest greenhouse concentration in North America in Leamington and Kingsville. It runs through the border. And Chatham Kent now, if anyone's on the call from there, they're building that industry up as well. But Leamington is the hub. And 85% of our produce in this area goes across the border. So that's, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, strawberries now are the big ones. We're just, a lot of lettuce experiment because all the lettuce was coming from the US. So you're seeing that innovation, which is really neat, which is another aspect that, they're becoming a little bit more self-reliant as an industry. We're seeing really cool innovations and resourcefulness, which is a super great spinoff. But I think it's the export piece that is the biggest worry, and pivoting is difficult just because the sheer size of the acreage of these facilities.
Excellent. And so I love the lettuce example. It was one of the things we talked about in one of the previous roundtables was how lettuce was both a kind of a challenge at the time, but a potential opportunity. So it's great to see that's
and you're
playing in.
seeing it here. Moochie's doing some really interesting things. They just opened a new 6-acre farm in Kingsville with all technology, and it's just incredible what's going to be coming.
Right. So maybe going back to Sue's sort of question, as you're talking to your communities and you've got this kind of mixed set of, some things that are not going so well and some things that surprisingly are going well, and where there's been sort of, new opportunities or a quick recovery. How are you messaging around that to your communities, to the businesses, to your councils? How do you kind of communicate the nuances of that? Has anybody sort of had some things that they felt have been successful or been useful in terms of how they've shared information? Brian.
Hey, Brock. I suppose one thing I can share, and I don't want to downplay maybe some economic hardship that other regions may be facing, but one thing a few observations I've made about this concept right now is that I think it's causing a massive push for like creative destruction in some of these organizations. Like a lot of people really open-minded about innovation right now. People are galvanized a bit more against like a common threat of sorts. So they're all much more collaborative and really interested in alignment. And the political attention that economic development is getting right now is the highest I think that it's ever been in my whole career in municipal, government. This is the issue of the day facing councillors and politicians is economics. So it's a really great time to be working in economic development because you're going to get the most leeway you'll ever get in your career right now to be bold and to try to innovate. So we've been having a lot of success at Advantage St. John's, like a lot of goodwill for companies, a lot of participation in all of our different events and workshops, and a lot of interest in doing more stuff. So it's, while there might be some short-term pain, I think really this situation is going to drive all new innovation, trade relationships, and a lot of support for just going and making it happen. So if you had some of these ideas that would have been a bit more, didn't know if they would fly, like now's the time to try them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great insight. Yeah, this sense that don't let a good crisis go to waste. There may be some things that we can do at the local level. Has your council or other elected officials that you're working with been responsive to that, Brian?
So we're interesting. We are technically like an NGO, a nonprofit. We operate independently of the three towns in our region are the city of St. John's, town of Conception Bay South, and the town of Paradise. And they've really given us a free pass to just go do what you think needs to be done to drive economic development. We have the privilege of making our own strategy and following through on it, and we report back through our board and things like that of the progress we're making. So all we've gotten from them are words of encouragement and go off and please keep creating success so we can feel like we're, working effectively on the economic development file. So it's really positive. Yeah, like support to work freely on things.
Excellent. And I guess this is the point at which I got to give kudos to Stephanie and Laura, who, Economic Developers Council of Ontario. Here we are attracting folks from all across the country to join the discussion. So great to have you with us, Brian. And good job, Stephanie and Laura, get the word out about these sessions. Anybody else got some experiences to share about how they've been sort of communicating the kind of the opportunities and the challenges in the current context? I was just about to volunteer someone. So Sean, thanks for raising your hand. I do have a victim in mind for the next question, but they've got a short reprieve. So Sean, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I had a feeling my name would kind of come up at some point because the whole automotive supply chain and automotive as a subject too. So I know, Sue, you mentioned the agriculture, 85%, a lot of them are exporting out, but it's interesting because on the automotive supply chain or part suppliers, there's been a lot that have been their bread and butter is the parts, but they've been exploring other markets, other types of sectors altogether. So I think some marketing of the Ontario Together Trade Fund has been piquing a little bit of other opportunities for them. It's a bit of a roller coaster ride as well because that's still a large component. So a lot of them that have to ship or shift gears entirely, it can be tricky. So they're looking at other 15 or 20% other opportunities for different sectors, different types of products. So it can be an opportunity for some. I know some others are reliant on sales for automotive as well. So I heard with Stellantis, for one example, that's been a tricky one that's impacting those companies that are reliant on them. So there's other manufacturers out there where they may be able to explore those types of opportunities as well. So it's been busy. So I don't. Some are hoping they will receive funding if there is those opportunities. So we'll kind of see how that plays out and then continue to work with them.
So thank you, Sean. Anybody else that has some thoughts to offer up on this? I might go next then to maybe a couple of groups that sort of have the broader view of things going on across bigger regions of the province. So I might go to Jay Amer next, and Jay knows I always put him on the spot at these sessions, but because he's got his finger on so many different communities across Eastern Ontario, whether there's things that he's seen there that are kind of note or of interest, or maybe provide a bit of a model for some of us to be thinking about. And then I might corner some of the folks from MedCat next. But Jay, any thoughts that you can share with us at this point?
Hey, Brock, I was just about to hang up actually.
You knew I was going to call on you. That's why.
And we're in listening mode today, but no, I'll leave my camera up because I haven't looked at the mirror yet. One of the, it can really echo what we're hearing. We have a real diverse economy out here with 13 counties, 10 cities, and big in automotive and energy and agriculture, which you heard about. And I think you captured it well. It's really wait and see, ever evolving. And in fact, I'm based in Peterborough. I talked to some folks I know here that are in the tier 2 automotive, and they just haven't seen anything yet. And some of them have seen some costs, but they're looking for other suppliers. But it really is. I think the word is opportunity, and that's what our communities are seeing. And we are an investment attraction agency, basically. And we do professional development as well. But we've been on calls. I mean, we've been targeting Europe for the last 3 years, quite frankly, or more, probably 5. And we're on a call yesterday with the European company. They were looking at Mexico and or US to get into this market, North America. They already have an operation or an office somewhere in the States. I hadn't considered Canada. And once we started talking and they started making the connection, and this is just an example, we hear this all the time, hey, you guys are a lot more like us. You've got great border crossings in Eastern Ontario, and when things settle down, that'll be a positive. A lot of the companies we dealt with were looking to get into the U.S. markets via Ontario, and that's sort of that sales point is tenuous right now, but as you say, there's a lot of bluster and bluff going on. One of the things we're doing is we partnered with the NGen, Next Generation Manufacturing, and we're doing a study on how regional economic development entities can support their members and manufacturers. We're working on that over the summer. And again, it's a moving target. We're doing some interviews and looking at events like this. And so that white paper that's coming out of this will be something we'll incorporate into this sort of small study. It'll be released at our conference September 17th, 19th in Ottawa, oemc.ca. All are welcome. Jay Myers is going to be there at the opening plenary to help present this, Jay from NGen. And we also have Sarah Wilshaw, who's Canada's Chief Trade Commissioner, on that panel. So whether you're from Eastern Ontario or not, some good informative stuff. And we're actually, so it's such an important issue, we're putting this session on before the comedian comes on. We usually want to with a comedian for a lot of hockey player, but we're actually putting this plenary on. And partly because James flying off to Frankfurt for something from Ottawa that day. But all in all, though, we're still monitoring it. We've got some work going on. And you mentioned breaks. As things settle down after COVID, we're all hoping maybe summer is the time we can catch up on our work. We're not seeing that. We're all busier than ever. And and again, working with EDCO, we built a really good rapport with EDCO and Invest Ontario, Invest Canada. So we continue to support it, and that's why I like to sit in on these sessions, Brock. You always pick up some more information. The person from Linkton I've never met, but hearing her commentaries there, and what's happening in the rest of Ontario, because we are all working together, even though we compete when it comes down to trying to win certain businesses. So that's sort of my summary, Brock, unless there's something else you want to hear about.
No, that's perfect. I appreciate that, Jay. And as I say, you're working with so many different communities that it gives you that higher level perspective on some of the things that we're all wrestling with. And maybe from a similar perspective, I might see if I can put some of the MedCat folks on the ground on the spot. I see Goran and Emmanuel and Daniel. I think there might be a couple more. Anybody from the Ministry of Economic Development who can kind of share some thoughts, insights into what you're seeing at that big picture level across the province?
Brock, do you want me to take it?
Sure, yeah, Laura, that would be great.
Yeah, so Laura Gibson, I'm the regional manager for Business Advisory Services, the Western team. So I think we're seeing like a real mix, Brock. We're seeing companies that are, for those of us old enough to remember '08, that are starting to pivot and think about how they can do things differently. We've had some really cool applications under the OTTF. I think the word defense has come up a lot in like how can we supply the defense industry, but I think I'm taking that with caution because I've seen the flavor of the week come by before. But I would say, there's sectors like ICT that we're seeing being dramatically affected by the tariffs and the changes and what's going on in the economy. But we're also seeing some like rising stars as far as like we're going to pivot and we're going to do this, or we need to look domestically or whatever. So we're seeing a bit of a mix, but I would say for the most part it's much more positive than I expected, with a lot of question marks in everyone's decision making plan, right? Like we do have a subsector of companies that are like, we are not going to invest right now because we don't want to spend the dollars. And like I said, I remember working through this sector in '08. And the companies that did pivot and did think creatively and did work through that are the ones that thrived at the other side too. So, it's a lot of coaching and discussions that my team's seeing and the teams are seeing across the province, with pockets of really unique things and working together collaboratively, which I think is great. So I would say it's much more sunny with like kind of those question mark, exclamation marks behind it. Than maybe you would expect. Obviously, like in Windsor and those kind of areas, we are seeing some concern, especially as my esteemed colleague Nancy Creighton would say, the tooling industry, where the tooling industry is always kind of the canary in the coal mine. But we are seeing some of those companies in that sector really thinking about how they can pivot and work differently. And I don't want to use buzzwords, but they're really thinking creatively on how they can kind of come out of this in better form. Hopefully that's useful.
No, that's interesting, and yeah, I mean, so we're on a similar wavelength, which is good news for me because it means I haven't made a mistake in some of the analysis that I started with. But yeah, that kind of mixed story, but somehow more positive than we might have anticipated is really interesting. Laura, you kind of flagged the ICT sector as something that was struggling a bit. Can you share a few more sort of thoughts or insights into that? You don't necessarily have to name specific companies, but what are some of the challenges that you're seeing in that space?
You know what? I can't dig into deeper on that. And I don't know if Amy Britton's on the call or not, but we're just seeing some lagging on that. And I can definitely dig into that a little bit more. As you can imagine, there's a lot going on. So some of this stuff, we're really good at being generalists, but we're not always digging deep. So I can definitely get you some more information if you're interested in that, Brock.
Yeah, that would. I'm curious about it because I think it's something that if there's a trend emerging there, it would be good to be on top of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will fully admit that is not a sector that I'm like have ever been an expert in. So yeah. So and I guess the other thing that I should mention when you talk about sectors and things like that, I'm fortunate that my oldest son graduated from business and is working in this industry, and I see a real niche market for some of our like new grads and some of our students on how they can work with kind of that core manufacturing and implement like innovation as in AI and how the technology all intersects, right? Because I think people like don't always think of like core manufacturing and how you can adapt that. And it's really interesting having those work conversations with him on how like some of the ICT and AI products can integrate into what I would call like traditional manufacturing, or what we would call often as advanced manufacturing as a supported sector from MedCat's perspective. So I think there's, again, I'm seeing more success than doom and gloom at the most part, but some difficult conversations for sure. So hopefully that's useful.
No, that's really helpful, Laura. Thank you. I don't know if any of your colleagues from the ministry want to add anything to that. Well, they're all so shy today. All right. Well, I may circle back and put some of you on the spot as we go forward, but I do think that what Laura's raised is kind of interesting when we sort of think about the kind of the big projects that are emerging across the province, and they're not in some of those sectors that we've traditionally kind of doubled down on, like ICT or automotive or that sort of thing. And I, again, don't want to tell tales out of school, but I think about things like the company from Huron County that's making a major soybean investment into Sarnia. This is a $500 million processing facility they're looking at. A company that I spoke to recently that's planning a fairly large scale aluminum extrusion plant in southern Ontario. Right? There's these sort of things that maybe we should have done this 10 or 20 years ago, but it wasn't sort of top of the agenda. And suddenly we're seeing these kinds of big scale projects in places that we might not have anticipated kind of being the center of a lot of these activities sort of emerging. Has anybody got sort of examples of big new projects that are starting to come together in their communities? Nobody wants to talk about any of them.
There's lots swirling around, but nothing that I can talk about or my team can talk about at this point.
Right.
But I would say it's like 90% positive most days.
Well, excellent. I do know there's a couple of folks from Invest Ontario on the call, and I know we've had some big announcements from them over the last few months. I think of Minth in Windsor. I think of Ferrero in Brantford, some of that sort of thing. From the IVO folks, what are you sort of feeling in terms of the investment climate in Ontario? What's the word on the street from your perspective?
Good morning,
Daniel,
everyone.
I
I think Jane was on earlier. I think she might have had to jump to another call. So, Daniel Deering, a site selection advisor here in Invest Ontario. I think I've met quite a few on this call before. So, I can speak from a site selection perspective, maybe, and some of the trends that we have seen. I think, the EV sector has softened. That's no surprise. I think that was the main focus of our attention for several years. That has shifted, at the beginning of this year. And I think at the start of the year, in many of the conversations I've had with municipalities, I think there was a lot of doom and gloom, right? And particularly in the automotive focused communities. What I've noticed in the last couple of months is with the government response at a provincial level, at a federal level, I think municipalities are getting more optimistic that we are, and I think like you touched on, Brock, we're going to get through a lot of this bluster. We got to ride it out. It is a little bit of a scary time, particularly for those communities that aren't diversified. But I would say that there's been a shift in the tone, certainly from the municipalities that I've been dealing with. One thing I think, and again, I just want to keep it to the site side because that's my expertise. I don't want to talk about the wider kind of like projects and strategies. I have noticed there's an opportunity now, right? We're going through this kind of fallow period where we can communicate to municipalities and our partners all across the provinces that this is an opportune time to make sites ready. Right, we've long struggled in the province and all across, Canada, to have investment-ready sites, right? And clients, particularly up until the end of last year, required investment-ready sites for the most part. A lot of municipalities didn't have that for various reasons. It's very expensive to, bring utilities to a site, etc. So like if we are experiencing this uncertainty for 6, 12, 18, however many months, let's use it as an opportunity at the local level to kind of understand what are those local challenges with making a site investment ready. And can you actually do it, right? Can you get council on board to provide some funding to bring services to a site, to undertake environmental assessments if they need to be done on a site? Because when things ramp up again in a couple of years' time, when this Trump administration has exited, who knows what's after that? But we would expect, and we would expect and hope that there's a gold rush of companies that are coming back to us in the automotive sector and other sectors. I'll very briefly say that we are beginning to see work on other sectors, right? You know, agri-food business and those kind of projects are coming in a little bit more. On the EV side, obviously they've softened, but we are beginning to, I think over the last couple of years, we saw these massive projects like PowerCo and other like massive energy consumers, you know, into the hundreds of megawatts. We are beginning to see a kind of a return to normal where projects might be looking at the 20 to 30 megawatts, still big, but I think a kind of a return to the norm. And we also, there's a couple of other areas that Critical Minerals Fund, I think, which is MedCat is working on. So we expect, you know, more projects to come in over the coming months in that kind of sector as well. So there's still a lot of you know, exciting work that, you know, Invest Ontario is working on, but certainly on the automotive side, it's been a little bit of a, you know, a pivot or an adjustment for us.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel. I think lots of interesting information in there. I do think that that call to investment readiness is really interesting. And there are some communities that are definitely moving in that direction. I know Bruce County has been spending a lot of time thinking about investment readiness. I know that Simcoe County is ramping up on some things they're hoping to do in that space. But definitely a call to action for all of our communities to be thinking about the backlog of investments that might be building up in the current climate and how we get ready for that down the road. And maybe on a related note, I want to go back to Sean. You made a comment in the chat that you had a good opportunity that you were hoping, expecting to come to your community, but it's too early to kind of share the information. I don't know if you can kind of share just some high level stuff about you know, what they're telling you about why Canada, why your community in the context of the current environment. Are you hearing some messages around why they're looking at an investment at the moment right now and why they're working with you?
Yeah, I'll try to be as, I guess, confidential as I can be on some of these. And there's not just one. There's potential opportunities just with existing businesses too. So I did mention with companies that might be in the automotive supply chain side of things, they may be looking at potential expansion plans based on those opportunities into other markets as well. But I think that's kind of the big thing right now is the retention, helping those that might have that expansion plan in mind and those opportunities to remain competitive against other countries overseas. So one of the things that's come up is, you know, even in China, for example, there might be giga tooling or tool and die manufacturers over there doing things that our companies in Canada have to remain competitive, and we have to be able to have the equipment, the tech at these companies that are able to remain competitive in Ontario. So they might be looking at equipment or technology that you know, keeps us on the radar for those deals that need to be made with their end use buyers as well. So there's a few on that end. So the expansion of existing, and then, you know, as you mentioned with investment readiness, that's still something that's piquing interest. So it's not like export to the US has disappeared or minimizes. That's still going to be there. It's just looking at, you know, remaining competitive and boosting those companies we do have to, I don't want to say face off with the US companies, but be on the top 5 list or, you know, top 3 so they can you know, exist for many years.
Excellent. I appreciate that, Sean. And I think you skirted the confidentiality quite well. We still know no more about the specific opportunity, but that's helpful information. Is anybody else sort of talking to potential investors at the moment that you know, can sort of share the kinds of messages or feedback that they're hearing? Not seeing anything. I'll share maybe. Oh, Sue, yeah, go ahead.
And sticking in the confidentiality piece too, I think ultimately I love the messaging about being ready for the backlog, because in our area, we're still seeing it's all about infrastructure, water, electricity, natural gas. So having those things, like that's the messaging that consistently for the years that I've been in NECDEV in Essex County, that is something that we're really focusing on and still working to go through. And that's what everyone who's looking at us needs too.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, and if yeah, oh, Daniel, see, this is great. I don't have to talk at all.
Sorry to butt in, but
No.
yeah, so I would say from an Invest Ontario side, we have consistent messaging that we've used for years, right? And I think we're only emphasizing it now, or should I say, we're emphasizing it to another level now, right? We have a stable political environment. We have access to third level education, which is, much more affordable than in places like the States. We have a stable energy environment, right? And as we're beginning to see, and we usually see this in the summer in many places in the States where they experience significant blackouts, we don't experience that on the same level. Access to healthcare, essentially free healthcare. So those are the key messages that we would have always communicated to clients. And I think over the last 6 months, it's only kind of highlighted the issues down south that we have a really strong base here, and we're continuing to communicate that again and again. And our clients are, maybe previously it might have been tough for them to understand that. They may not have known Canada, but I think they really understand Ontario better and what we can offer as an investment destination.
That's excellent. Thank you, Daniel. I might also, if I can, maybe call on Jessica, who made a comment in the chat around the investment readiness side of things, including the talent piece. Jessica, is that something you're hearing from folks in the field, or that you're starting to kind of understand from an economic development service delivery perspective, or what's leading you to kind of think about that in the current context?
Yeah, a little bit of both. Definitely business retention and expansion. The businesses in our area are talking about how staff retention has been very difficult. Skilled workers has been very difficult to find. A lot of time and energy goes into training people, and then they leave for other opportunities. So we are starting to do a workforce study to gain more information and strategize how we're going to tackle that. And then when we work with investors from outside our area, globally or in the Americas, that is one of their top questions is what do we have here in the area? What do we have the right workers to support their project? We are focused on manufacturing, advanced manufacturing areas, so that directly relates to a particular kind of talent. And we are fortunate to have post-secondaries within our municipality, Durham region municipality. Yeah, so that's just one of the things that we, in addition to the obvious things about having available sites and pricing being reasonable and infrastructure requirements, the talent piece has been even more important now. It feels like businesses and investors are struggling to find that strength to support their operations.
Great. That's awesome. Thank you, Jessica. Kathy.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. My name is Kathy Ireland. I'm from one of the regional innovation centers located in Oshawa. And I heard yesterday when I was driving home on CBC, they were talking about the talent aspect and how many graduates we have that are not getting positions. And then I was talking a few months back with our Durham workforce lead, Heather McMillan, and she was mentioning that internationals have a harder time to get their first position in Canada. But the CBC was, and I didn't catch who it was that they were having the interview with, but it was somebody from some university or some local college in Ontario, and they were, kind of underscoring the concern of if we are not employing our graduates, we're in trouble. So I was just curious to know what's, insight across the audience today to see what they're seeing. And I know that the colleges have just recently, and even in the universities, we're seeing, some of the programming that they were offering for specific industry fits, right, have been, put on the chopping block. So I was just curious to know a little bit more about what the sentiment is on that theme.
Yeah, I sort of anecdotally, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it's a pretty tough job market for students for summer positions and for new graduates kind of trying to move into the workforce at the moment. And that includes in some of our sort of most technical areas, engineering students and things like that are really struggling to kind of find those first opportunities. And I think partly that's fear of recession is depressing, hiring, that sort of thing. But yeah, there seems to be a challenge emerging there. Kevin, have you got some insights into this?
Not on this particularly, but just take the opportunity, wanted to share just kind of a counterbalance as well. What we're experiencing with some of our metal industry here, we're seeing three employers who are actually downsizing or shutting down completely operations due to the steel and aluminum tariffs. And I think that there might be other communities who are experiencing that as well. I don't know if that was touched upon in great depth, but I'd be curious to see also what some people are experiencing in that area.
Okay. Yash, I see a hand as well.
Yes, this is to answer Kathy's question. I was an international student and then became a PR, then citizen, and it's been a long journey. But yes, Kathy, you're right. When it comes to cracking down the market, the job market over here for an internationals, it's really, really tough because most of the organizations are requesting Canadian experience, which is like minimum of 3 years, which we wouldn't be having. We might have the international experience, but that is not taken into consideration. And recently, because of the immigration policies changes, there are many of my, I would say, acquaintances whom I have known for years are leaving the country, and they are actually a big asset. They have a lot of experience. They are in, they are in the organizations at lead positions. Yet they are not having a PR in hand, that is permanent residency, because they graduated from college and not the university. So they'll be leaving, and that position would become vacant pretty soon. So this is something which is ongoing, and I don't know. We had many of I attended many roundtable discussions about it, and tried voicing out what exactly is going on. But yeah, we are still waiting for a resolution on the situation.
Yeah, I do feel like this is one of those aspects of the current challenge that's not being discussed as much as some others. Kathy, you had some additional thoughts on this, or?
Well, I just received this morning an invitation or overview of a new platform that's all about mentorship for newcomers. I think it's called Metterfi, I think it is. And I wonder whether there isn't a solution that matches, and even us just recently, I have a fantastic graduate from Ontario Tech that has been working with me for the last year, and she's just secured a position with a big company in Toronto, and I'm delighted for her to find that position. But it was found with her own personal network of people that introduced her when a position became available. So, and she's working with us. So at Spark Center, we make connections too. So she's kind of understands how we work to make warm connections for the newcomers that we work with that are coming through the startup visa pathway. In fact, that's the reason why the Eastern Ontario Innovation Corridor was established from Spark Center to work with Invest Auto on Launch Lab, because we're the most Eastern-focused regional innovation centers, to really, kind of join forces and leverage the networks that we have so that we can help newcomers as well as our local clients. And I was just curious because I heard that yesterday, and I've been part of some, diversity, equity, inclusion events locally in Durham region, and I know that it's been raised as a concern. So I just was curious. So thank you, Brock, for entertaining.
No problem,
My
Kathy. And
fault.
if you can, maybe you reference the platform that you found might be sort of helpful. If you can find that and maybe add that into the chat so people can take a look. That would be great as well. I recognize we're sort of at the 11 o'clock point. I do want to just circle back very quickly to talk about Kevin's question on steel and aluminum. So I understand if people have to make an exit, but maybe we can squeeze 5 more minutes in to talk about steel and aluminum here. Has anybody sort of got some insights or experience with companies in their community or folks that are struggling with that steel and aluminum space and what the direction is of some of their considerations and concerns? I'm not seeing anything right away, so I'll maybe add one there that I'm wondering if this may be similar to what Sue talked about in the context of Leamington earlier, and the kind of the rebound of the agricultural sector as sort of a shifting in thinking that kind of opened the eyes to new opportunities. I've had 2 companies that I've come across in Southern Ontario talk to me about aluminum opportunities in the last 10 days or so. One I mentioned earlier, a new aluminum extrusion opportunity, and another that was looking at sort of shifting their aluminum manufacturing from plants in the States to looking at opportunities in Ontario. And so I wonder if maybe part of what's likely to happen in this space, particularly for aluminum, maybe to a lesser extent for steel, is just this sense that it takes a while for the industry to kind of react to the substantial changes that are underway, but that it could in fact lead to some, expanded investment in capacity in the Ontario side. I think steel is a much more complicated sort of market from a global perspective, but certainly on the aluminum side, there does seem to be some natural advantages in the Canadian context, and so I think we might start to see some things in that context. Kevin, does that sort of square with your experience?
In some regards, yes, because we're seeing companies that have raw inputs pivoting and looking for more innovative ways to source locally and maybe get even better product. But these are more on the steel side, these companies that have been directly impacted. And so, yeah, I think that there might be a pivot or a swing, but what we're experiencing is really that kind of maybe initial changes in contracts, reductions in what they can sell into the United States. Ironically, there's another company that actually makes appliances, and they call themselves the unintentional geniuses because they had actually started the nearshoring project of opening a plant in the States and expanding that, and now they're rocketing. They're going up 25% while others are losing 10-15%. So they're competitors. So we're seeing that, but it's of course the job losses are a significant consideration as we look at what's happening.
Appreciate that, Kevin, and maybe something we can circle back to in the next discussion to sort of take a bit of a deeper dive into what may be going on in the steel and aluminum space, and maybe copper will play out in some similar ways as we move forward. So, Stephanie, I've run us over time on this. Maybe I'll sort of quickly sort of say, anybody have a final comment or a final question that they want to throw into the mix? And this is the chance to do that. But if there's nothing there, maybe Stephanie, I'll turn things back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brock, and for everyone that participated today and attended today's event. This has been a really great conversation and a great session, probably one of the better ones in recent. It's been kind of quiet, so that's nice to see the conversations happening and the sharing of information, which is what we want out of this session. I will remind everyone that I said at the beginning of the session today that we have our next trade and tariff roundtable discussion will be on Thursday, August 14th at 10 a.m. So watch for that. We also have 2 regional events happening in the fall. So we will be in Burlington on September 11th, and that agenda highlights downtowns and the work that we do in that sector. And then on October 2nd, we're going to be in Rideau Lakes in the Eastern Ontario with a really interesting agenda that concentrates on how building community assets may attract investment, workforce development, their growing agritourism industry, and also how trade and tariff climate is impacting border communities. So there's those 2 events this fall. And of course, we are asking you to save the date for our annual conference. It is going to be Monday to Wednesday, February 2nd to 4th. So that's a change. We're starting on Monday this in 2026, and we'll be opening registration October 14th. The committee's been working really hard to develop some really great sessions, and we've changed the agenda a little bit. So hopefully we'll see you at one of these events coming up. Again, thank you, Brock. It's always such a pleasure to watch your presentations and to learn from you. So thank you. And to everyone who attended, we appreciate your support, and we will continue moving forward. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you, Brock.
Bye, everyone.